The cantina on Kepler Station was dark and smoky. Strange music played from speakers that looked like they had been fixed many times. The air smelled of alien drinks and old fear. In the corner, a table full of young soldiers sat quietly. They were all different species, but they all had one thing in common. They were scared. At the head of the table sat Zixthak. He was old for a Vorthani warrior. His shell was cracked in many places. Scars covered his arms and face. His eyes were dim, but they still held the look of someone who had seen too much war. He held a glass of blue liquid in his clawed hand and looked at each young face around the table. "You think you know what fear is," Zixthak said in a low voice. "You think you understand what war means, but you have never fought humans." The young soldiers looked at each other. Some of them had heard stories about humans. Others had never seen one. They all leaned forward to listen. "Let me tell you about my first meeting with humans," Zixthak continued. "It was during the Outer Rim War. I was younger then. I thought I was brave. I thought I knew how to fight." He took a long drink from his glass and stared at the table for a moment. "We were on a world called Tertius Prime. It was a mining planet. Nothing special about it except for the metals they dug from the ground. Our command told us that a small group of humans had landed there, maybe 20 or 30 of them. They said it would be easy to capture them." Zixthak laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "I was part of a company. We had 200 warriors. We had the best weapons. We had air support. We had everything we needed to win. The humans had nothing but their small ship and whatever they could carry." The old warrior set down his glass and looked directly at a young Kalari soldier across from him. "Tell me, young one, if you had 200 fighters and your enemy had 30, what would you do?" The Kalari soldier straightened up. "I would surround them and demand they surrender. If they refused, I would attack with overwhelming force." "Good answer," Zixthak said. "That is exactly what we did. We found their landing site near the main mining complex. It was a big place with lots of buildings and equipment, perfect for a battle. We surrounded the whole area. There was no way they could escape." He paused and took another drink. "Our commander called for them to surrender, and that is when I first saw her, the human leader. Her name was Katie Brooks. She was small, even for a human. She had short brown hair and green eyes. She did not look dangerous at all." Zixthak's voice got quieter. She walked out of the mining complex alone, no weapons in her hands. She walked right up to our commander like she was going to visit a friend, and then she smiled. Several of the young soldiers made nervous sounds. They had heard that human smiles could mean many things. At first we thought she was afraid. Many species smile when they are scared. But there was something different about this smile. It was not fear, it was not anger. It was something else, something that made my skin crawl. The old warrior flexed his claws, remembering. Our commander asked her to surrender. She said no. He told her she was surrounded. She said she knew. He told her she would all die if she did not give up, and she just kept smiling. Zixthak looked around the table at all the young faces. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Commander, we have been here for 3 days. We have not been sitting around waiting for you." Then she turned around and walked back to her people. The cantina seemed to get quieter. Even the music seemed softer. We should have known something was wrong then, but we did not. We were confident. We had them trapped. So we prepared for a normal battle. We would attack at dawn. We would use our superior numbers and weapons. It would be over quickly. Zixthak finished his drink and signaled for another one. Dawn came. We began our attack. The humans did not run. They did not hide. They fought back, but not very hard. It was almost too easy. We pushed them back into the main mining building. We had them cornered. The server brought him a new drink. He did not touch it. That is when Katie Brooks appeared again. She was standing on top of the mining building. She was holding something in her hand. A small device. She was still smiling. The old warrior's voice became very quiet. She pressed a button on the device. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the ground began to shake. At first it was just a small tremor. Then it got stronger and stronger. He looked up at the young soldiers. The humans had spent 3 days planting explosives all through the mining complex. Not just in the buildings, in the tunnels, in the support structures. In the rock walls of the canyon around us, they had turned the entire area into one giant bomb. One of the young soldiers, a Thraxian with blue skin, spoke up. But they were inside the complex too. They would have killed themselves. Zixthak nodded slowly. That is what we thought. That is what any sane species would think. But humans are not like us. They had found the deepest, strongest parts of the mine. They had prepared shelters down there. They had food and water and air recyclers. They were ready to be buried alive. He picked up his new drink but did not drink it. The explosions started small, then they got bigger. The buildings began to fall. The canyon walls began to collapse. My unit was caught in the open. Most of my company was crushed by falling rocks. I was lucky. I was thrown into a drainage ditch. The rocks missed me by inches. The cantina was completely silent now. Other customers had stopped talking to listen to the old warrior's story. The explosions went on for almost 10 minutes. When they stopped, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Where there had been a mining complex, there was now just a pile of broken rock and twisted metal. It looked like a mountain had fallen down. Zixthak finally took a sip of his drink. We thought they were all dead. We thought they had killed themselves to take us with them. Our reinforcements came and began digging through the rubble. We found bodies. Many bodies. Most of them were ours. He set the glass down hard. 3 days later, we heard sounds coming from under the rocks. Not the sounds of someone dying, the sounds of someone digging. The humans were alive. They were digging their way out. The young soldiers looked shocked. A few of them made disbelieving sounds. Katie Brooks was the first one to climb out of the hole they had dug. She was dirty and tired, but she was alive. Behind her came Ben Martinez, her second in command. Then came the rest of her team. 26 humans climbed out of that grave they had made for themselves. Zixthak's 4 eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. They had survived for 3 days buried under tons of rock. They had eaten emergency food and breathed recycled air. They had listened to us digging above them and waited. Just waited. He leaned forward. And when Katie Brooks saw me in the medical tent where they were treating my injuries, she smiled again. The same smile she had given our commander before the battle. And she said, "I told you we had not been sitting around waiting." The old warrior sat back in his chair. That was my first lesson about humans. They do not think like we do. They do not fight like we do. They are willing to do things that no other species would even consider. And when a human smiles at you before a battle, you should be very, very afraid. He looked around the table at all the young, frightened faces. That is why I tell you this story, because someday you might meet humans in combat. And when you do, remember what I learned on Tertius Prime. Never trust a smiling human. They are always planning something terrible. The cantina remained quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, the normal sounds of conversation and music began again. But the young soldiers at Zixthak's table continued to sit in silence, thinking about what they had heard. Outside, somewhere in the station, human voices could be heard laughing and talking. Several of the young soldiers looked toward the sound with new understanding and fear. Zixthak ordered another drink and looked at the young soldiers around his table. They were still quiet from his first story. Their faces showed they were thinking hard about what he had told them. Good. They needed to understand what humans were really like. "You think that story was bad?" the old warrior said. "Let me tell you about the second time I fought humans. This was on a jungle world called Verdania, hot and wet and full of things that wanted to kill you. Perfect place for humans, as it turned out." He waited for the server to bring his drink. The young soldiers waited too. They wanted to hear more, even though they were scared. By this time in the war, I was a squad leader. I had learned from Tertius Prime. I thought I knew how to fight humans now. I was wrong again. Zixthak took a long drink and continued. We had built a fortress in the jungle. It was perfect. High walls made of the strongest metal. Energy shields that could stop any weapon. Automated guns that could hit a target from 2 miles away. Underground bunkers with enough food and water for 6 months. Command told us it was impossible to take by force. A young Kalari soldier leaned forward. What happened? Humans happened, Zixthak said simply. A human squad found us. Only 12 of them. We had 200 warriors in that fortress. 12. Humans against 200 Vorthani. The numbers should have meant nothing. He paused and looked out the window of the cantina. In the distance, stars twinkled in the black of space. Their leader was a female called Lisa Parker. Staff sergeant, they called her Rank. She had two main helpers. Jake Sullivan was their explosives expert. Carl Hansen was their medic. The rest were just regular soldiers. Zixthak turned back to the table. At first we thought it would be easy. 12 humans in the jungle against our fortress. They could not attack us directly. Our shields would stop their weapons. Our automated guns would kill them if they got too close. All we had to do was wait for reinforcements to arrive and hunt them down. The old warrior laughed, but again it was not a happy sound. We were so confident. The first day nothing happened. We sent out patrols to find them. The patrols came back and said they had seen no sign of humans. Good, we thought. Maybe they ran away. He took another drink. The second day, one of our sentries disappeared. Just gone. No body. No blood. No sign of a fight. Just an empty guard post. We thought maybe he had fallen asleep and wandered off. It happens sometimes. The young soldiers exchanged worried looks. The third day, 2 more sentries vanished. This time we found signs. Footprints in the mud. Human footprints. They were watching us. Learning our patrol routes. Learning when we changed guards. Zixthak's voice got lower. The 4th day they left us a message. Written in perfect Vorthani script on a piece of metal. It said, "We know you are scared. We can smell your fear." We were not scared then, we were angry. He flexed his claws. The 5th day, Jake Sullivan showed us what he could do. One of our supply trucks exploded on the road outside the fortress. Not a big explosion. Just enough to destroy the truck and block the road. When we sent people to clear it, they found another message. Your food will run out eventually. We have all the time in the world. The cantina seemed to get quieter as other customers stopped their conversations to listen. That was when we began to understand. They were not trying to attack our fortress. They were trying to make us afraid, and it was working. Zixthak looked at each young face around the table. Every day, something happened. A guard would disappear. A supply convoy would be attacked. Equipment would break in ways that made no sense, and always, there would be a message left behind. He counted on his claws. Day 7. Your commanders are lying to you. Help is not coming. Day 10. We know the names of your families back home. Day 13. Some of you will die here. We will choose who? One of the young soldiers, a Thraxian with shaking hands, spoke up. How could they know our families? We asked the same question, Zixthak replied. Carl Hansen, their medic, had been studying our personal effects from the guards they captured. He learned our language, he learned our customs, he learned what would frighten us most. The old warrior finished his drink. But the worst part was not the messages. The worst part was that they never stopped. Day and night someone was always watching us. Always moving. Always hunting. He gestured to the server for another drink. Vorthani are strong fighters, but we need rest. We need 8 hours of sleep every day. We need time to eat proper meals. We need time to clean our weapons and maintain our equipment. Humans do not seem to need these things. The server brought him a new drink. He held it but did not drink. Lisa Parker had divided her squad into teams. While one team slept, another team watched us. While one team ate, another team sabotaged our equipment. They worked in shifts, like machines that never break down. Zixthak's 4 eyes seemed to glow with remembered fear. By the 3rd week, none of us were sleeping well. Every sound in the jungle could be a human. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Our own automated guns would sometimes fire at nothing, triggered by sounds the humans made to confuse the sensors. He took a small sip of his drink. Week 4, they started using our own psychology against us. Vorthani warriors have a death call, a sound we make when we are dying. It calls for help and warns others of danger. The humans learned to copy this sound perfectly. The young soldiers looked horrified. Carl Hansen would hide in the jungle and make the death call of a young Vorthani, the sound of a child dying. It drove our warriors crazy with rage and fear. They would run into the jungle to help, and the humans would pick them off one by one. Zixthak set down his glass harder than necessary. Week 5, Jake Sullivan started his real work. He had been studying our fortress for a month, learning where the power lines ran, where the water pipes were buried, where the communication equipment was hidden. The old warrior's voice became very quiet. He did not try to destroy everything at once. That would have been too easy to fix. Instead, he broke one small thing each day. A power connection here, a water valve there. Nothing that would kill us, but everything that would make life harder. He looked around the table. By week 6, we were drinking recycled water that tasted like metal. Our food was cold because the heating systems kept breaking. Our communication with command was full of static and interference. We were living in the strongest fortress in the sector, and we felt like we were under siege. Zixthak picked up his drink again. That was when Lisa Parker made her biggest move. She sent us a final message. This one was not written on metal. It was carved into the living wood of a tree right outside our main gate. It said, "You have been defeated. You just do not know it yet." The cantina was completely silent now. Even the music had stopped. Our commander was furious. He ordered a full attack on the jungle. Every warrior in the fortress except the essential guards. We would find these humans and kill them once and for all. The old warrior's voice became barely a whisper. We found them, all 12 of them. They were sitting around a small fire, eating rations and cleaning their weapons. They did not try to run when they saw us. They did not try to hide. Lisa Parker stood up and smiled at us. Several young soldiers made nervous sounds. She said, "Thank you for coming. We have been waiting for you." Then she pressed a button on a device in her hand. Zixthak paused for a long moment. Jake Sullivan had not just been sabotaging our fortress. He had been rigging the jungle around it. For 6 weeks, while we thought he was just being annoying, he had been planting charges in the trees. Hundreds of charges, all connected, all waiting for one signal. He finished his drink in one gulp. The trees began to fall, not randomly, in a pattern. They fell toward our fortress, toward our walls, toward our power generators and communication towers. In 10 minutes, 6 weeks of careful preparation destroyed everything we had built. The young soldiers sat in stunned silence. When the dust settled, our fortress was broken. Our walls were crushed under massive tree trunks. Our shields were down, our guns were buried. And the 12 humans were gone, vanished back into the jungle like ghosts. Zixthak signaled for another drink. Our relief force found us 3 days later. We were sitting in the ruins of our fortress, jumping at every sound. 200 of the finest Vorthani warriors, defeated by 12 humans who never fired a shot at our walls. He looked around the table at the terrified young faces. That was my second lesson about humans. They do not fight the way we expect them to fight. They do not attack when we think they will attack. They are patient. They are persistent. And they never, ever stop coming. The old warrior received his new drink and held it up in a mock toast. Lisa Parker taught me something that day. She taught me that humans hunt differently than any other species. They do not just kill their prey. They study it. They learn its habits. They discover its weaknesses, and then they use those weaknesses to destroy not just the body, but the spirit. He took a long drink and set the glass down firmly. That is why you should fear humans, young ones. Not because they are stronger than us. Not because they have better weapons. But because they never give up. They never stop learning. They never stop hunting. And once they decide you are their prey, you will never be safe again. Zixthak looked at his empty glass for a long time before speaking again. The young soldiers waited. They had learned not to interrupt the old warrior when he was remembering. His memories were dark places, and it took time to bring them into the light. "The third time I fought humans," he said slowly. "I learned something that still gives me nightmares. I learned what happens when you make a human angry. really angry. He signaled for another drink. His clawed hands were shaking slightly. This was during the siege of New Geneva Station, a big space station that served as a trading post between our territories. Both sides wanted it. Both sides were willing to fight for it. The battle lasted for months. The server brought him a fresh drink. He took a long sip before continuing. I was a company commander by then. I had survived 2 encounters with humans, so command thought I understood them. I thought I understood them too. I was wrong. Again. Zixthak's 4 eyes focused on something far away. The human unit defending the station was led by a man called Tony Mitchell, squad leader. He was professional, disciplined. He followed all the rules of war. His team was the same way. Ryan Davis was their sniper. Very good at his job, but he only took clean shots. Maria Santos handled their communications. She was polite, even when talking to enemies during prisoner exchanges. The old warrior paused. And there was Amy Cooper. She was their medic. Young, maybe 25 human years old. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, and she treated wounded soldiers from both sides, even treated some of my own warriors when they were hurt. Zixthak's voice became softer. Amy Cooper believed in something humans call mercy. She would risk her own life to save others. It did not matter if they were human or Vorthani or any other species. If someone was hurt, she would help them. She was the kind of person who made you think maybe the war was a mistake. He took another drink. The siege went on for weeks. Both sides fought hard, but it was clean fighting. No torture, no killing of prisoners, no targeting of civilians. Tony Mitchell made sure his people followed the rules. My commanders made sure we followed the rules too. It was almost like a gentleman's war. The cantina had grown quiet again. Other customers were listening to the old warrior's story. Then came the day everything changed. There was a group of civilian refugees trapped in the lower levels of the station. Families with children, old people, sick people. They could not fight, they just wanted to leave safely. Zixthak's claws scraped against his glass. Both sides agreed to a temporary ceasefire. Amy Cooper volunteered to go down and help evacuate the civilians. She went with a small team of medics and engineers. No weapons, just medical supplies and evacuation equipment. The old warrior's voice became very quiet. My unit was supposed to provide security for the evacuation. Make sure no one attacked the civilians or the medics. It should have been simple. It should have been safe. He stopped talking for a moment. The young soldiers waited. There was a new commander in my unit. Young, eager to prove himself. He did. Not like the ceasefire. He thought it was weakness. He thought Amy Cooper was a spy pretending to be a medic. Zixthak finished his drink in one gulp. When Amy Cooper and her team entered the civilian area, this young commander ordered his squad to attack. I tried to stop him. I told him she was a medic. I told him she was protected by the rules of war. He did not listen. The old warrior's hands were shaking more now. They killed her. Amy Cooper died trying to shield a human child from gunfire. She had no weapons. She was no threat to anyone, but they killed her anyway. The silence in the cantina was complete. Even the background noise from the station seemed to fade away. When Tony Mitchell found out what happened, something changed in him. Something broke, or maybe something was unleashed. I had seen him angry before, but this was different. This was not anger. This was rage. Pure, cold, calculating rage. Zixthak gestured for another drink with trembling claws. At first, nothing seemed different. Tony Mitchell still followed orders, still used proper tactics, still treated prisoners correctly. But there was something in his eyes, something that made even his own people nervous. The server brought him a new drink. He held it, but did not drink. Then the changes started. Small things at first. Ryan Davis, their sniper, stopped taking quick, clean shots. Instead, he started targeting non-fatal areas, arms, legs, places that would hurt but not kill immediately. One of the young soldiers looked confused. Why would he do that? Think about it, Zixthak replied. A dead soldier is just dead, but a wounded soldier needs help. needs medical attention, needs other soldiers to carry him to safety. One wounded soldier can take 3 or 4 healthy soldiers out of the fight. The young soldier's face showed understanding and horror. Maria Santos started doing things with our communications that I still do not understand. She hacked into our private channels, the channels we used to talk to our families back home. She would play recordings of our wounded soldiers calling for their mothers. She would broadcast the last words of our dead. Zixthak took a small sip of his drink, but Tony Mitchell was the worst. He started studying us, learning our culture, learning our psychology. He discovered that Vorthani warriors have a strong sense of honor. We believe in fair combat, single combat between leaders to settle disputes. The old warrior's voice became darker. Tony Mitchell began challenging our commanders to single combat. By our own laws, they could not refuse. But he did not fight fair. He did not fight to win quickly. He fought to make them suffer. Zixthak looked around the table at the frightened, young faces. Humans have better endurance than most species. Tony Mitchell would fight just hard enough to tire out his opponent, then back away and wait. When the Vorthani commander was exhausted, Tony would attack again, just enough to wound, not kill. Then he would back away and wait again. The old warrior's claws scraped against the table. He would keep this up for hours, making the fight last as long as possible, making sure everyone could see, making sure everyone understood that he was not just defeating our leaders, he was humiliating them. One of the young soldiers made a sick sound. The psychological effect was devastating. Our warriors began to lose confidence in their commanders. Commanders began to refuse challenges, which made them look weak. The entire command structure started to break down. Zixthak finished his drink and immediately ordered another. But the truly terrifying part was how organized it all was. Tony Mitchell was not just lashing out in anger. He was using his anger, channeling it, turning it into a weapon. The server brought him a new drink. His hands had stopped shaking, but his eyes were still haunted. He studied our supply lines and targeted the shipments that would hurt morale the most. Medical supplies, food from home, letters from families. He made sure we felt cut off and alone. The old warrior took a long drink. He studied our shift schedules and timed attacks for when we would be most tired, most vulnerable, most likely to make mistakes. Zixthak's voice became barely a whisper. He studied our religious beliefs and used them against us. Vorthani believed that warriors who die in honorable combat join their ancestors in the afterlife. Tony Mitchell made sure our dead were dishonored in ways that would prevent them from reaching the afterlife. Several of the young soldiers looked like they were going to be sick. This went on for months. Every day something new, something worse, something designed specifically to hurt us in ways we had never imagined. And through it all, Tony Mitchell remained calm, professional. He never lost control, never made mistakes born of emotion. The cantina seemed to grow colder. That was when I realized the truth about human anger. Other species get angry and lose control. They make mistakes. They do stupid things. But humans get angry and become more dangerous. Their anger makes them smarter, more focused, more deadly. Zixthak looked directly at each young soldier. Ryan Davis told me later, after the war, that Tony Mitchell never spoke about Amy Cooper after she died. Never mentioned her name. Never showed any emotion about her death. But everything he did for the rest of the siege was about making us pay for killing her. The old warrior finished his drink. The siege ended when our high command decided the station was not worth the cost. We had lost more warriors to psychological breakdown than to actual combat. Entire units were requesting transfers rather than face Tony Mitchell's squad. He set down his empty glass. When we finally retreated, Tony Mitchell stood on the docking bay and watched us leave. He did not celebrate. He did not cheer. He just watched. And I swear I could see Amy Cooper's ghost standing beside him. Zixthak looked out the window at the stars. That was my third lesson about humans. Their emotions do not make them weak. Their emotions make them strong. When you hurt someone a human cares about, you do not just make an enemy. You create a force of nature. You create something that will hunt you with the patience of a predator and the intelligence of a scientist. He turned back to the young soldiers. Never think that making a human angry will make them stupid. Never think that grief will make them careless. When humans get angry, they become more human. And that is the most terrifying thing in the universe. Zixthak sat quietly for a long time after finishing his third story. The young soldiers around the table were afraid to speak. They had learned that the old warrior's memories were painful things, and rushing him would only make the stories stop. Finally, he looked up at them with tired eyes. "You think you understand humans now?" he said softly. "You think you know what to expect? The ones who smile before they kill you. The ones who never stop hunting. The ones who turn their rage into a weapon. But there is another kind of human. The most dangerous kind." He raised one clawed finger. "The ones who do not speak." The server appeared with another drink without being asked. Zixthak nodded his thanks and took a small sip. This was during the siege of Helix Station. 3 months of fighting in the dark corridors of a mining station built inside an asteroid. Close quarters combat. No room for big weapons or fancy tactics. Just warriors fighting warriors in spaces barely wide enough for 2 people. The old warrior stared at his drink. "By this time I was a battalion commander. I had fought humans many times. I thought I had seen every kind of human soldier. The loud ones who shouted battle cries. The clever ones who set traps. The angry ones who fought like demons. But on Helix Station I met 2 humans who were different from all the others." Zixthak took another sip. Their names were Sam Rivers and Nicole Ward. Sam was a demolitions expert. Nicole was a sniper. They were part of a larger human unit, but they worked apart from the others. They barely spoke to their own people. They certainly never spoke to us. He looked around the table at the young faces. At first we thought they were just shy. Some warriors are quiet by nature. But as the siege went on, we realized it was something else. They were not quiet because they were afraid or nervous. They were quiet because they were thinking. The cantina seemed to grow darker as Zixthak continued his story. Sam Rivers would disappear for days at a time. His own commanders did not know where he went. When we captured some of his fellow humans and asked about him, they said he spent his time studying the station blueprints, measuring distances, calculating load-bearing capacities, learning how the station was built. The old warrior's voice became lower. We thought this was normal behavior for a demolitions expert. Of course he would want to understand the structure before placing charges, but Sam Rivers was not planning normal demolitions. He was planning something much more complex. Zixthak paused to take a drink. For 4 weeks nothing happened. No explosions, no sabotage, no attacks on our positions. Some of our commanders thought Sam Rivers had been killed or had run away. I knew better. I had learned to fear human patience. One of the young soldiers leaned forward. What was he doing? Learning, Zixthak replied simply. Sam Rivers spent those 4 weeks mapping every pipe, every cable, every support beam in the station. He learned where the power came from, where the air recyclers were located, where the water treatment plants worked. He learned how everything connected to everything else. The old warrior flexed his claws. When he finally acted, it was not what we expected. He did not destroy anything important. Instead, he broke one small power connection in a maintenance tunnel on level 7. A connection that fed electricity to the lights in the corridor outside our main armory. The young soldiers looked confused. One small light going out, Zixthak continued. That was all. But Sam Rivers had calculated something we did not understand. That one light was connected to a circuit that also powered a cooling fan for a computer server. When the light went out, the fan stopped working. The server overheated. The server controlled the automated inventory system for the armory. He took another drink. Without the inventory system, our quartermasters could not keep track of weapons and ammunition. They had to count everything by hand. This took much longer. It created delays. Warriors had to wait longer to get supplies. Lines formed outside the armory. Warriors standing in lines make easy targets. The young soldiers began to understand. But that was just the beginning, Zixthak said. The next day, Sam Rivers broke a water valve on level 12, a tiny valve that controlled water pressure, to the showers in the barracks. The pressure dropped. Showers took longer. Warriors had to wait their turn. More lines, more targets. The old warrior's eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. Day after day, week after week, Sam Rivers broke one small thing at a time. Never anything that would kill us directly. Always something that would make life harder. Make us less efficient. Make us more vulnerable. He counted on his claws. A ventilation fan that made one room too hot. A door lock that made access slower. A communication relay that added static to our radio calls. Each problem was small. Each problem could be fixed, but fixing them took time and people away from fighting. Zixthak finished his drink. By the 8th week, we were spending more time maintaining the station than defending it. Our warriors were tired and frustrated. Our equipment was constantly breaking down. And Sam Rivers was still out there, still studying, still learning, still breaking things. The server brought him another drink without being asked. But Sam Rivers was not the worst of them. That was Nicole Ward. The old warrior's voice became barely a whisper. Nicole Ward was a sniper, but she did not act like any sniper we had ever fought. Most snipers take their shots and move to a new position. They try to kill as many enemies as possible as quickly as possible. Nicole Ward was different. Zixthak took a small sip of his new drink. She would watch us for weeks before taking a single shot. She learned our patrol schedules. She learned our habits. She learned which warriors were leaders and which were followers. She learned who was brave and who was scared. The cantina was completely silent now. When she finally started shooting, she did not target our best warriors or our commanders. She targeted specific individuals for specific reasons. A communications officer who always took the same route to the radio room. A supply sergeant who checked the same warehouse every morning at the same time. A guard who had a habit of looking left before looking right. Zixthak's claws scraped against the table. Each shot was impossible to predict. They came from different angles, different distances, different times of day. The only thing they had in common was that they were all perfect shots. Nicole Ward never missed, never wasted ammunition, never took a shot unless she was completely certain of the result. One of the young soldiers asked, "How many did she kill?" That was the truly terrifying part, Zixthak replied. She only killed 7 warriors in 3 months. 7. But those 7 deaths created more fear than if she had killed 70. The old warrior leaned forward. Because we never knew when she would shoot next. We never knew who she was watching. Every warrior on the station knew that Nicole Ward was studying them, learning their patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. He took another drink. Warriors started changing their routines randomly. They would take different routes to the same destination. They would vary their schedules, they would move in groups instead of alone. All of this made them less efficient, less effective, more afraid. Zixthak's 4 eyes focused on the young soldiers. Some warriors requested transfers rather than stay on the station with Nicole Ward hunting them. Others refused to leave their bunkers except when absolutely necessary. A few had nervous breakdowns and had to be sent for medical treatment. The old warrior sat back in his chair. The worst part was that we never saw her, never found her hiding places, never even found evidence that she had been somewhere after she took a shot. She was like a ghost with a rifle who could kill you from impossible distances. He finished his drink and signaled for another. Sam Rivers and Nicole Ward taught me something important about humans. The ones who shout and make noise are dangerous. The ones who get angry are deadly. But the ones who work in silence are something else entirely. The server brought him a fresh drink. They are patient in ways that other species cannot understand. They will spend months preparing for a single action. They will study their enemies with the dedication of scientists. They will wait for the perfect moment, even if it means missing dozens of good moments. Zixthak looked around the table, and when they finally act, their actions are perfect, precise, devastating. They do not waste effort or take unnecessary risks. They do exactly what needs to be done, nothing more and nothing less. The old warrior took a long drink. The siege of Helix Station ended when our high command decided the casualties were too high for what we were gaining. Not combat casualties, psychological casualties. Warriors who could no longer function because they were afraid of invisible enemies who might be watching them at any moment. He set down his glass. Sam Rivers had turned our own station against us. Every system failure, every maintenance problem, every small inconvenience made us weaker. Nicole Ward had turned our own minds against us. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every routine could be a death sentence. Zixthak looked out the window, at the stars. When we finally evacuated Helix Station, I caught a glimpse of Nicole Ward for the first and only time. She was standing in an observation window on the upper level, just standing there, watching us leave. She did not wave. She did not smile. She did not make any gesture at all. She just watched. The old warrior turned back to the young soldiers. Zixthak stared at his empty glass for a very long time. The young soldiers around the table had learned to wait when the old warrior went quiet. His final story was always the hardest one to tell. It was the story that had ended his military career and changed how he saw war forever. My last story, he said finally, is about the only time we actually defeated humans in battle. You would think that would be a happy memory. You would be wrong. He signaled for one more drink, though. His hands were steadier now. The telling of his memories had helped him carry their weight. This was at a place called Titan's Gate, a narrow passage between two asteroid fields, the only safe route for ships traveling between human and Vorthani space. Whoever controlled Titan's Gate controlled trade and military movement through the entire sector. The server brought him his drink. He nodded his thanks and continued. The humans had built a defensive position there, not a fancy fortress like we built on Verdania, just a simple military outpost on a large asteroid. It had basic shields, basic weapons, basic supplies, nothing special, but it was in the perfect location to control the passage. Zixthak took a small sip of his drink. Command decided that Titan's Gate had to be taken. They gave me 3 full battle groups, 15,000 warriors, the best ships, the best weapons, the best equipment. It should have been easy. The human outpost had maybe 200 defenders. The old warrior's voice was quiet but steady. The human commander was a man called Peter Graham. Colonel, they called his rank. He had 2 main officers. Major Helen Kim was his second in command. Captain Steve Turner handled their tactical operations. All 3 of them were experienced soldiers, veterans of many battles. He paused to look at each young face around the table. When we arrived at Titan's Gate, Colonel Graham requested a meeting under a flag of truce. This was normal. Sometimes defenders will surrender when they see they are outnumbered. I thought maybe the humans had finally learned wisdom. Zixthak laughed, but it was a sad sound. Colonel Graham came aboard my flagship with Major Kim and Captain Turner. They were polite, professional. They listened carefully when I explained the situation. I had 15,000 warriors. They had 200. I had the best weapons in the Vorthani fleet. They had basic defensive equipment. The old warrior took another sip. I offered them terms. Surrender the outpost and they could leave safely. Keep their personal weapons and their ship. No one would be harmed. It was a generous offer, more generous than they deserved. He set down his glass. Colonel Graham thanked me for the offer. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Commander Zixthak, we have orders to hold this position for 72 hours to allow civilian evacuations to be completed. We intend to follow those orders." The cantina seemed to grow quiet as other customers stopped their conversations to listen. I told him he could not possibly hold for 72 hours against my forces. He said he understood that. I told him his people would all die. He said he understood that too. I asked him why he would throw away 200 lives for an impossible mission. Zixthak's voice became very soft. He said, "Because those 72 hours will save 20,000 civilian lives. We think that is a fair trade." Then he saluted me and returned to his outpost. The old warrior finished his drink and immediately ordered another. The battle began at dawn the next day. We attacked with everything we had. The humans fought back with everything they had. It should have been over in hours. It took 6 days. He waited for his new drink to arrive. The humans used every trick they had learned in the war. They used our own tactics against us. They exploited every weakness we had shown them in previous battles. They fought with the intelligence of strategists and the desperation of cornered animals. Zixthak took a long drink. Major Kim turned their communications equipment into a weapon. She hacked our coordination systems and fed us false information about our own troop movements. Half our attacks failed because our units ended up attacking each other instead of the outpost. The old warrior's claws scraped against the table. Captain Turner used psychological warfare that made Tony Mitchell look like an amateur. He broadcasted recordings of Vorthani war songs, but changed the words to mock our honor and courage. He sent us detailed reports of how many of our warriors had died, and how many more would die before the battle ended. One of the young soldiers asked, "How could they hold out so long?" "Because they had been preparing for this battle for months," Zixthak replied. "While we thought Titan's Gate was just a simple outpost, they had been turning it into a fortress. They had dug tunnels through the asteroid. They had hidden weapon caches and supply depots. They had backup systems for their backup systems." He took another drink, but most importantly, they had been studying us. Every battle we had fought, every tactic we had used, every mistake we had made. They knew more about how we fought than some of our own commanders did. The old warrior looked around the table. On the third day, we broke through their outer defenses. On the fourth day, we destroyed their main weapons. On the fifth day, we cut off their power and water. On the sixth day, we finally overran their position. Zixthak's voice became very quiet. We found Colonel Graham in the command center. He was still alive but badly wounded. Major Kim and Captain Turner were dead, but they had died at their posts, still trying to coordinate the defense. Around them were dozens of recording devices and data storage units. The cantina was completely silent now. Colonel Graham looked up at me and smiled. Not the terrifying smile that Katie Brooks had given me on Tertius Prime. A different smile, a satisfied smile. He said, "Congratulations, Commander, you won." Zixthak finished his drink. Then he said something that chilled my blood. He said, "We held for 6 days instead of 3. That means all the civilians are safe, and you just taught us everything we need to know about how to fight Vorthani battle groups." The old warrior gestured for another drink. I did not understand what he meant at first. We had won. We had taken Titan's Gate. The humans were defeated, but Colonel Graham was still smiling. The server brought him a fresh drink. Then I saw what was in those recording devices. Every attack we had made was documented. Every weapon we had used was analyzed. Every tactic we had tried was studied and catalogued. The humans had been treating the entire battle as a learning experience. Zixthak's 4 eyes seemed to glow with remembered horror. They had recorded everything. How we coordinated our attacks, how we communicated with our units, how we supplied our forces, how we treated our wounded, how we responded to different types of resistance. He took a small sip of his drink. Major Kim had spent her last hours alive sending all this information to Human Command. Every detail of how we fought, every weakness she had discovered, every mistake we had made. The old warrior set down his glass. 6 months later, every advantage we had used at Titan's Gate was useless. Human forces began using our own tactics against us, but better. They knew how we would respond to every situation because they had studied our responses at Titan's Gate. Zixthak looked out the window at the stars. The battle that we thought was our greatest victory became the beginning of our defeat. Every time we fought humans after Titan's Gate, they were ready for us. They knew what we would do before we did it. He turned back to the young soldiers. That was my final lesson about humans. They do not fight to win battles. They fight to win wars. Every defeat teaches them something new. Every victory costs them something they are willing to pay. The old warrior raised his glass. We killed 200 humans at Titan's Gate, but those 200 deaths taught them how to defeat 15,000 Vorthani. We won the battle, but we lost the war. He took a long drink. Colonel Graham died 3 hours after I found him. His last words were, "Tell your commanders that humans learn from everything, even from dying." Zixthak finished his drink and stood up slowly. The war ended 2 years later. The humans won, though they paid a terrible price for victory. Now they are our allies, and I am grateful for that. Because I never want to fight them again. He looked at each young soldier around the table. You asked me to tell you about humans. Now you know. They are not stronger than us. They are not faster than us. They do not have better weapons or better technology. But they have something more dangerous than any of those things. The old warrior picked up his walking stick. They have the ability to learn from anything, to adapt to any situation, to turn any experience, even defeat and death, into knowledge they can use to win the next fight. He started to walk away, then turned back. Remember this above all else. If you ever have to fight alongside humans, consider yourself fortunate. If you ever have to fight against them, pray to whatever gods you believe in that you die quickly. Because if you survive, they will learn from the experience. And they will use what they learned to make sure you do not survive the next time. Sixthak walked out of the cantina, leaving the young soldiers to sit in stunned silence. Outside, somewhere in the station, human voices could be heard laughing and talking. But now the young soldiers understood what that laughter really meant. It meant that humans were always learning, always adapting, always preparing for the next challenge, and that was the most terrifying thing in the universe.